Welcome to This Explainer. Now, today, we're unpacking something truly unexpectedly fascinating. At first glance, if you were just flipping channels, you might think we're just talking about a colorful, lighthearted cartoon about a family of Australian cattle dogs. But listen, if you've been paying any attention at all to the absolute cultural phenomenon that is the Healer family, you already know it is so much more than that. This beloved animated show actually provides a literal masterclass in child psychology, complex developmental stages, and, let's be totally honest with ourselves here, deep-seated adult insecurities. It's almost like a Trojan horse of emotional intelligence. Over the course of this explainer, we are going to look incredibly closely at the deeply relatable anxieties of growing up and parenting that are masterfully woven right into the very DNA of the source material. We're talking about the stuff that keeps you up at night, perfectly mirrored by a family of animated dogs. Because here is the wild thing about this show. Beneath the simple, seemingly playful plots of these quick 7-minute episodes lie some of the most profound lessons you will ever encounter. One of the source material's absolute most powerful lines is shockingly simple. It just says, "Kids don't come with instructions." And wow, doesn't that just hit hard? It hits hard because it's the absolute unfiltered truth. Whether you are a brand new parent, absolutely terrified and trying to figure out if your child is developing properly, or maybe you're just a kid or even an adult trying to understand your own incredibly complex emotions, the reality is we are all just figuring it out as we go along. None of us have the manual. And the brilliant creators of this show use these animated dogs to beautifully and sometimes painfully mirror those exact raw human anxieties. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll briefly explore the Healer family, tackle escaping the comparison trap, look at the illusion of perfection, navigate healthy competition, and finally unpack emotional comfort versus independence. Section 1. Exploring the Healer family. So, just to ground us, before we get into the heavy psychology, we're looking primarily at the parents, Bandit and Chilli, and their two daughters, Bluey and Bingo. What makes them the absolute perfect vessels for this psychological breakdown is their sheer, unfiltered authenticity. They are exhausted, they make huge mistakes, they worry constantly. Which brings us directly to a massive, haunting question that sits in the back of the mind of almost every single new parent. Why do we rush our children's milestones? Why are we always in such a hurry? Well, it's because our deep instinctual love for our kids easily and almost completely invisibly mutates into an anxiety-fueled competition. It becomes a literal baby race. Part 2. Escaping the comparison trap. To understand this trap, we have to look at one incredibly poignant flashback from the show. Mother Chilli is a highly anxious new parent, sitting at a mother's group, and she is secretly sizing up her baby against all the other babies in the room. Now, look closely at Bluey's developmental timeline here, because it was absolutely not a straight line, not even close. At first, she rolled over and sat up very early, which actually made Chilli a bit of a show-off. She felt like she was winning the baby race. But then things got weird. Bluey completely bypassed normal crawling and started bum shuffling, just scooting around on her bottom. And that was followed by her crawling backwards. It was totally chaotic, but then finally, out of nowhere, she unpredictably just stood up and walked. Right there in the kitchen. But we really need to look at how this erratic, non-linear development sparked a completely intense wave of anxiety for Chilli. Because when we compare Bluey's bizarre path to another baby in the group, a baby named Judo, you see the comparison trap spring completely shut. It's devastating. Judo was doing literally everything by the book. She crawled early, then she seamlessly started pulling herself up on furniture. She was the textbook baby. Meanwhile, Bluey is over there literally sliding backward across the floor on her stomach like a reverse turtle. Seeing this, Chilli fell into a deep, dark spiral. She felt like an absolute failure, fully convinced she was doing everything completely wrong simply because her child's path looked a little different than the kid next to her. And then comes the breakthrough. And it comes from a surprisingly simple, almost throwaway interaction. Chilli is visited by another mom from that same playgroup, Coco's mom. Now, up until this point, Chilli just kind of assumes Coco is this mom's first child. They're all in the same boat, right? Wrong. It turns out Coco is her 8th child. Yes, 8. 8 kids. Suddenly, the entire dynamic shifts. This woman isn't just a peer anymore. She is an absolute veteran of the parenting trenches. She has the ultimate undeniable credibility. And with the quiet, unshakable authority of someone who has literally raised 8 children and somehow survived the utter chaos of it all, she looks at a stressed, exhausted, deeply insecure Chilli and says just a few simple words. There's something you need to know. You're doing great. The sheer emotional weight of these words in the source material is completely palpable. You can feel it through the screen. It instantly brings Chilli to these massive, heavy tears of relief. It is exactly the validation she, and honestly probably millions of viewers watching at home, desperately needed to hear. And that brings us to the ultimate core takeaway from this entire stressful baby phase, distilled into one absolutely beautiful mantra. Just run your own race. As Chilli tells an older Bluey years later when recounting the story, it is entirely about letting go of those heavy external expectations. Think about it. Bluey eventually walked not because her mom forced her to do it to beat judo in some imaginary competition. She walked because she simply saw something she wanted over in the kitchen, and she went for it on her own time. Celebrating individual timelines, whether you are a baby learning to walk or an adult trying to figure out your career, is quite literally the only way to escape the comparison trap.
Section 3. The illusion of perfection.
Now, as kids grow up, a crazy thing happens. That external pressure they get from parents often morphs into this intense internal pressure that kids start placing on themselves. It's a shift from outward comparison to inward perfectionism. In one specific example, Bluey is trying to make a Father's Day card, and she explicitly defines the word perfect as meaning very good. She is completely determined to draw a flawless picture for her dad. But here's the catch. This impossible, incredibly rigid standard completely paralyzes her. She can't do it. She just keeps starting over, getting frustrated, and tearing up piece of paper after piece of paper. And her creative process becomes this totally chaotic mess. She desperately wants to draw a happy, perfect memory, but drawing the family couch perfectly is just way too hard for her little hands. So pivoting, she decides to draw a boomerang instead, but specifically, she remembers the boomerang that accidentally hit her dad. Then her mind wanders and she remembers dad getting hurt during one of their rough games. It's not a perfect memory at all, but through all this intense frustration and crumpled paper, her mom steps in to remind her of a vital, grounding truth. Parenting is tough, drawing is tough, life is tough. When Bluey cries that her drawing isn't perfect, Chilli gently but firmly replies, "I'm not perfect either." And then they look up and realize the family fridge is completely covered in old, messy drawings anyway. There's no space for perfection. The massive lesson here: a good, honest effort made with actual love is vastly superior to a stressful, totally unattainable standard of perfection. Section 4. Navigating healthy competition. So what happens when that internal drive for perfection suddenly meets actual physical head-to-head competition? Well, in one instance, the family builds a massive backyard obstacle course, and the dad, Bandit, is completely determined not to take it easy on his kids. He refuses to just let them win. In fact, to prove a massive point, he gives himself a completion time of exactly 0 seconds. How? By blatantly, shamelessly cheating. He just bypasses the entire obstacle course completely to claim the grand prize, which is a delicious sour sherbet. Now, you really have to ask yourself, why on earth would a grown parent cheat in a backyard race against their own young kid? It seems mean, right? Well, it's actually to teach a harsh but absolutely necessary reality of the world. Chilli steps in to coach a furious Bluey with 3 distinct, incredibly important steps. Step 1. Acknowledge that the course of life won't magically move out of your way just because you want it to. Step 2. You actually have to practice hard instead of constantly looking for easy shortcuts. And step 3. Accept the reality that cheaters ultimately never get ahead. By flat out refusing to just hand Bluey an unearned win, these parents are actively ensuring she actually develops real, deep-seated resilience. The psychological logic presented here is just brilliant. Think about it. When Bluey first gets her hands on the sour sherbet by watching her dad cheat, and then she decides to just cheat right back to get it, it actually doesn't taste good to her. The victory feels hollow. But Chilli reminds her that winning only tastes genuinely sweet when you haven't cheated to get there. That dopamine hit only comes from the real work. And this newly found resilience is immediately put to the test in a high-speed, intense game of memory snap against Bandit, who adopts the ultra-competitive persona of a mongoose. And you know what happens? By playing absolutely fair, focusing her mind, and relying purely on her practiced skills, Bluey legitimately beats the mongoose. She proves once and for all that earned victories are literally the only ones that actually matter. As children inevitably grow stronger, more skilled, and more resilient, they naturally start to push for more physical and emotional space. It's a natural part of growing up. But that brings us to an incredibly compelling and somewhat heartbreaking question. Does the constant societal push for independence actually overshadow our fundamental human need for comfort? Let's explore this deeply in our final theme. Part 5.
emotional comfort and independence.
Growing up inevitably means separating. We all go through it. In this scenario, Bluey and Bingo decided it's finally time to act like big kids and sleep in entirely separate bedrooms. And the way the source material handles this brilliantly illustrates the massive, hidden anxiety of true independence. Setting up the separate rooms doesn't just mean moving beds. It becomes this highly emotional exercise in dividing a completely shared life. They have to painfully negotiate splitting up their shared watermelon rug. They have to have a serious sit-down to decide who gets full custody of Malcolm the Frog. They have to figure out a sharing schedule for Gloria the Christmas toy. And the kicker? Even after they are finally in their separate beds, they can't handle the isolation. They continuously sneak out into the hallway just to pass little notes under the doors and check on each other, desperately needing those goodnight messages. And by the end of that very first long night, Bingo has literally dragged her entire mattress out of her brand new, independent room and pushed it right back next to Bluey's bed. The physical rooms might have changed on paper, but their intense emotional reliance on one another remained completely 100% intact. And what this beautifully proves is that emotional security and that raw, underlying need for sibling comfort will often completely override the societal desire for total isolated independence. And that's not a failure. Sometimes, no matter how old you are or how independent you're supposed to be, you just desperately need your person right next to you. So when we pull all of these incredible psychological sources together, the hidden depths of the healer family become so incredibly clear. Whether we are talking about a totally stressed mother learning to finally trust her baby's weird backward crawling phase, or a young child having the massive realization that her drawings, and by extension herself, don't have to be totally flawless to be loved, or two sisters painfully figuring out how to sleep apart only to realize they don't want to, it all boils down to a few core things. It comes down to profound empathy, immense patience, and aggressively, actively avoiding the comparison trap. Because as we learned right at the beginning, absolutely nobody comes with instructions. The absolute best any of us can do is just wake up every day and try. So, as we wrap up this explainer today, I really want to leave you with one final, deeply important thought to chew on. Think about your own life for a second. Whether you're currently parenting a child, whether you're aggressively pursuing a new career, or honestly, if you are just trying to keep your head above water and get through the week. In the grand race of life, whose race are you actually running? Are you running your own unique, beautiful race? Or are you spending way too much time looking over your shoulder at the person in the lane next to you? Think about it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and whatever you do, keep learning.